All right, so are you a better talker or doer? Are you better at speaking or working with your hands? Quick survey now, show of hands actually. How many of you would say I'm a words person? Show of hands. How many of you would say I like to talk? Okay, fantastic. Don't everybody talk at once. But how many of you would then say that you are more of a doer? You like to let your work speak for itself. Okay, fantastic. Here's the thing. The Bible has a lot to say about the importance of both our words and our actions. Just an incredible amount. The Bible would say both can be matters of life and death and are worth reflecting on and considering. For example, if you are skilled with words, we just know that you have some incredible advantages. For example, you are probably going to be pretty good on a first date. You might know what to write in any card for any occasion. You might even be brave enough to make a toast at a wedding, sort of impromptu. You can handle the mic, or you can do well in interviews. So words are really good, and if this is you, good on you. But the thing that we also recognize is that words are not everything. This is why Nike's "Just Do It" mantra continues to endure. Or you may have seen that this year for the World Cup, they have sort of reimagined this phrase, and they now have the new phrase, "rip the script." Okay, I don't know if you guys have seen this. This was a big cinematic thing that they did, not let it rip, but rip the script. And rip the script is this commercial that involves all of these celebrities, and essentially there is a director who is handing them a script that they are supposed to follow, the written word. And each of these celebrities move and act outside of that script, and the idea is that you throw the script, the written instructions, throw that to the side, and the liberated, powerful, individual thing to do is to just act on your own initiative. And that's sort of the message right now that they've picked for this once every 4 years. This rose to the top. This is the messaging that Nike wants. But of course, this isn't just about Nike. This goes way beyond one company, because we are always, all of us, regardless of your faith commitments this morning, we are always trying to define and think through the relationship between our words and our actions, what we say with our lips and the lives that we lead. So we have these phrases, these sort of classic dad-isms, like talk is cheap, or don't talk about it, be about it, or put up or shut up, or the very famous dad phrase, one of the most famous of all time, actions speak louder. Of course, right? So we all know these type of things, right? These are things that dads just say to try and emphasize the importance of our actions. But this leads me to ask once more, what do you think? And this time, I'm not asking because I have a question for you, but because these are the opening words that Jesus chooses to begin a story about a certain father. He opens with a question, and spoiler alert, he is going to end with a question, which indicates what? It indicates that Jesus is interested in our experience, in our thoughts, in our participation. So I'm going to ask you throughout this morning as we open this simple text together to be asking yourself, where do I fit into this story? What sense do I make of it? What character do I relate to? What is Jesus trying to raise to my attention today? Now, don't worry. The story itself is very short. And there's a lot going on right now about attention spans in this sort of TikTok era. And I just want to point out, today, essentially the text from Jesus' story is so short that it could fit in a 15 to 30 second ad on YouTube or TikTok. It is that short. And yet, as I've talked about in the introduction to this series, one of the incredible things about Jesus' stories is that I describe them like this. They are often this long and this deep. They are incredibly short, just a few sentences, this little word count with this incredible depth that can shake the foundations of our lives and cause us to change and want to grow and understand. So this morning's story comes from the good news of Jesus' life according to a man named Matthew. And in fact, it comes 21 chapters into that biography. So this is nearing the final movements of Jesus' life. And this text that we're going to read, it comes in conversation that Jesus is having between himself and his critics. These religious experts and leaders that are saying, They're sort of pushing back and challenging Jesus on what he has been doing and what he has been saying and just exactly who he seems to think that he is. And in this back and forth, Jesus essentially says, all right, fellas, well, tell me, what do you think of this one? And he tells this story, Matthew chapter 21, verse 28. There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work today in the vineyard." "I will not," he answered. But later he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. That son answered, "I will, sir." But he did not go. Jesus asks which of the 2 did what his father wanted, and the obvious answer is which son? The first. It's obvious, right? We all understand this. Children understand this. The crowd that day is seen in our Bibles responding in the affirmative. They understand. They get the answer right. It's obviously the first. Now, let's just go through this parable. Notice that Jesus gives just enough detail. No more, no less to make a simple point. This is a very tight, concise, masterful story. It's one you could memorize, that children can retell back to you. And notice that it has a certain pattern. The pattern repeats itself. The father goes to the first son. He invites him into the work. The son responds verbally and then does something with his actions. And then it repeats with the second son. But each of their actions and words are reversed, right? This is the logic of the story. And I recognize this morning that some of us are going to relate more to one son or the other more naturally, but let's start with the first. Dad comes, calls him to get up and join him in the work, and the son refuses. Maybe, like many of you, he is not a morning person, right? But in this moment, he's rude, he's disrespectful. In this cultural climate, a son that says, "I ain't going outside," no quiero, that's literally what it says. Back in that time and place, this would have been this sort of a terrible thing for a son to do, shameful behavior. But notice this. What does the father do? Well, he doesn't fly off the handle, does he? He doesn't tell the son, "You lazy son of a gun, after all I've done from you, or if you don't do this, then I'm going to take away this later on." He doesn't threaten him. He doesn't humiliate him. Rather, the father in the story actually respects the son's decision and gives him space. Now, this is interesting. Speaking as a dad on Father's Day, I recognize that any stories around fathers are going to land, they're going to feel a little bit different today, right? And so let me just speak as a dad. First of all, when we're talking about this father in this story, it reminds me, first of all, of the times that I have not been the good father, right? The times that I have been impatient, that I have said more than I should have said, that I have not been like the good father in the story. For others of us in the room, I expect that maybe you are reminded of a harsh father or father figure you had growing up, or distance or loss that you feel between your dad and yourself. Or maybe for some of us, we feel that we had a father figure that was a very respectable person that we have let them down, that we have not lived up to their expectations. So we have all of these feelings and experiences inside of all of us and all around the room and watching from home this week, which is why I think it's so important and why I want to just encourage you to sort of just take a breath on this Father's Day and hear the story, is that when Jesus tells this story about this father, he is teaching us about God the Father. He's teaching us about the God of love and truth, who is patient with us, who loves us more than we could possibly imagine and delights to give us a good part in his work in the world. This is the Father that the Bible describes God as being a father to the fatherless. That Jesus comes and teaches us on his authority and relationship to pray to and address as our Father, right? That the Bible says that because of Jesus, because of his work on our behalf, that we who have said yes to Jesus through faith can regard this God as our Father. That we are sons and daughters of the King. And so this allows us to sort of trust in Jesus' way and his work and his word enough to say that this is who we are. We are beloved sons and daughters of God, regardless of how we may feel today. Regardless of how much of a relationship we do or do not have with our pops this morning, or how much we feel we deserve a mug that says best dad ever on it today, that we are children of a Father whose ways are higher and whose love runs deeper than we can possibly know. And so with that in mind, we turn back to the story. Because here's the thing, whether you woke up knowing this or not, or maybe you have known it and forgotten it along the way, or feel that you no longer deserve to be in this relationship, Jesus tells us that God the Father, his arms are always open to us. That God wants nothing more than to receive us back. There's a theologian that says this: God's hands are always extended in blessing, reaching out to us, reaching to touch us on our shoulders and give us his blessing. The only problem is that our shoulders aren't there because we're somewhere else, not because God has turned us back on us. So this is the Father. Put all aside all the other ones. Let's think about the Father that Jesus describes today. So back to the first son's response. This is a pretty relatable response, isn't it? The son's knee-jerk reaction is to refuse his father. But then when the dad leaves the room, the son begins to kind of play the scene over in his mind. He thinks about his dad's face, and he has this change of heart. He throws the bed covers off, and he decides to get up and go. And I do not know about you or your story, but there are so many times, friends, that I have felt like this. That maybe I have said, no, I'm not going to help, or I'm not going to give to that, or I'm not going to forgive that person, or no, I don't want to hang out with them. And then there's something in me that as I sit with it, or maybe even as I try to sleep, I go, you know what? I actually think I'm supposed to do that. And we have the opportunity to change our minds. I remember I was at camp one time, and this was a winter camp. This was years ago, and there was this young man who were up in the mountains, and everyone is supposed to go to church, to chapel for that evening. But the San Francisco 49ers had made the playoffs, and they were in a big game. And I do not know how this 15-year-old had managed to do it, but he had finagled his way into getting Wi-Fi from one of the staff members so he could watch the game, and he has it on his phone. So we're all supposed to go to chapel, and I'm like, hey, man, I'd love to have you. I want you to be part. This is a really great opportunity. And he was just like, respectfully, he's like, Pastor Brad, he's like, sorry, I'm a diehard fan. He's wearing his gear. He's wearing his jersey. He's like, I'm not going to go. I'm just letting you know I'm not going to go. I'm going to be right here. And so I decided in the moment, I'm like, I'm not really going to be able to convince this kid. But I just tell him this. I said, look, man, I respect your decision, but I said, I hope in the future that there comes a time where you realize what we're talking about in that room and how it's so important that even as a fellow fan of this team, that I'm telling you that what's happening there is even more important than this big game. And I walk away. 10 minutes later, I'm sitting in a row like this, and the young man walks up to me and he hands me his phone, and he sits down. He had already told me, he'd already gotten permission, he wasn't going to show up, but then he has a change of heart. This is what I believe God desires for us. Very simply, when we have committed to do something that we know we should not, or we have refused to do something that we then believe would be best for us to do, there is no shame in changing our minds and acting in a different direction. So many of us feel this loyalty to, I'm going to just stay this way all the time, and I don't think that Jesus invites that in us. Jesus is always inviting us to discover more of who God is. You do not owe any allegiance to words you have spoken that are not true. You don't have to stand behind true words to just stay consistent. You can change your mind and act differently. And we don't need to hesitate to do this. So here's the thing. I'll put it the simplest way I can. There are some of you that you imagine that I keep track of when you show up to church late and that I rank people somehow according to when you show up. Here's the truth. When you are not here, know that I pray for you, and I pray that you come. And I'm so happy to see you, even if you pop in at the beginning of my sermon or the end of my sermon. I'm excited that you're here. Better late than never. It's better to decide, you know what, I woke up a little late. I'm not going to be as well dressed today, but you know what, I'm going to show up and I'm going to serve. Some of you, I just want to encourage you guys, you have said no to serving here so many times that people have stopped asking you. They've told me this. When I joined the church, they already said, nah, Pastor, don't ask that person. They've been saying no for years. But here's the thing. If God puts something on your heart and encourages you to do something, my encouragement to you is when it is helpful and when it is appropriate, that you grab a broom, you grab an apron, you show up, you grab a children's ministry application, you fill it out, that you don't just say, well, this is who I am. What are we settling for who we are currently when Jesus, with each of these stories, is inviting us to become more of who God has made us to be? So maybe you said no, but let's act in accordance with how God is calling us. Now, here's the deal. We have all said the wrong thing. We have all spoken in anger, and the quickest route back to relationship is to apologize and change direction. I'm going to give you one of my embarrassing moments. A couple weeks ago, 10 days ago, Victor and I were part of this thing called SOAR. So we're going to Magic Mountain with a group of our students. We're down in Bakersfield, and there's about 80 kids from all these churches. We're getting them onto buses, okay? So everybody's doing the head count, and I'm in full chaperone mode. The bus driver is at the front of the bus, and the bus driver's mic is not working as he's giving us the safety instructions. Does this make sense? So I'm in the back of the bus, and I'm in full pastor mode. Hey, everybody, quiet down, listen up, blah, blah, blah. I'm just like full on, right? And I'm doing all this stuff, and there's this one adult that we're trying to get through this safety stuff so that we can get on the road, so we can get these kids to keep our appointment. There's this one adult in the very back row, and he's just yapping. And he's annoying me. And so I just turn around and I lock eyes with this guy and I say, respectfully, sir, I say, you need to be quiet. And he tells me, I'm translating. Okay? He's got a 14-year-old next to him that does not speak English very well, that he is translating safety instructions to. But in the moment, I am just locked in, I'm trying to help, and I shut this kid down. Oh my gosh, here's what I do in the moment. You know what I do? I stand up, I reach over 2 rows, and I shake the guy's hand, and I'll say, I'm so sorry, right? I'm so sorry, my bad, that's on me. I don't try and say, well, do it quieter. You know, right? I'm in the wrong, and the first thing I need to do when I speak the wrong thing, the next thing I have to ask myself is, what is the right step that I can take to try and make this right? Right? So sometimes we get humbled, but this is just part of following Jesus. Here's the deal. Churches, and I say this mostly for myself now this morning, churches are places where people get second chances. Churches are places where people get second chances to change their minds. To change their minds about what is possible, to change their minds about their own worth, to change their minds about who God is, to change their minds about which direction, what is possible for them and their family. We have an opportunity, and church is designed at its best to be a place not where people come to never change, but to be a place where people can change and think in new ways because of a God who is always doing things to create new life. And so we want to be this type of place where people, including your pastor with that poor interpreter, can have second chances. Which brings us now to the second son. Second son is not like big brother. Second son is a smooth talker. Dad calls him to come to work in the vineyard, and the kid says, I will, sir. Now, here's the thing. If you've ever had one kid that you're kind of having a hard time with, and you go and you tell your other kid to do something, and they respond really well, how good does that feel, right? You're like, oh my goodness. I will, sir. Si, senor. This is very polite, very respectful. He says, you got it, Pops. I'll see you out there. Right away, sir. He gives the correct, respectful answer that he knows his dad wants to hear. And again, some of you have been doing this since you were kids. You learned what coaches want to hear. You learned what parents want to hear, what pastors want to hear. You're just good at telling people what they want to hear. And that's a skill in life. That will get you somewhere. But then as soon as the dad walks out of the room, what does this kid do? Well, he yaws, and he hits snooze, right? Just 5 more minutes. Who among us has not done this, right? Just 5 more minutes. Hit snooze on the phone. What's the big deal about this? Well, the big deal about this type of behavior, I think, is that the genius of Jesus is that Jesus knows that oftentimes later becomes never. Here's how it works. 5 more minutes, this is how it just works in our real lives. We know what Jesus is talking about. 5 more minutes becomes, hey, I'm going to sleep in for half an hour. Becomes, you know what, I'm going to sleep now so that I can do it tonight. Becomes, you know what, I'll do it tomorrow morning. Becomes, you know what, this is going to be a 2027 New Year's resolution. Becomes a pipe dream. Just like that. All along the way, if somebody would have asked you, hey, are you about that thing? You would have said, oh, yes, ma'am, absolutely. I'm all about that. I'm just about to get to it.
But it's always later, and the problem is that later becomes never. Some of us know what it is like to be around people who are good at talking about certain things and who promise the world but then don't follow through. What Jesus is plainly illustrating, and I'm going to give you what I think is the punch and the bite of this. Here's what Jesus is illustrating. He's illustrating three things at once. One, over time, he wants you to just know, actually from the beginning, you don't fool God. You don't fool God with your empty promises. The son doesn't fool his dad. The dad isn't convinced in the story. God knows what's going on. So you don't fool God. The second thing is this. Over time, you stop fooling other people around you. Your own word becomes worth less and less. And finally, and this is the saddest, darkest point, but I think over time, you know what actually happens? Is that you fail to convince yourself anymore. You sign up for something, and as you walk away from the sign-up sheet, you go, I probably won't be there. And it's sad, and it hurts, and it's dark. But this is what happens when our words and our actions cease to line up over time, is that our word is devalued. There are people that I know in every church that I have worked in that when you sign up for something, everyone in leadership knows they have to provide a substitute for you. Because your track record is you don't show up. I have had times in my life where I was this person in different areas of my life, where I was not consistent enough to care about my own reputation. Jesus is trying to help us to find a better way. So I get it, this is harsh, but I think this is the bite and this is the punch of Jesus' parable. He's trying to say, you will devalue your own word and reputation over time if you do not figure this out. And that's what Jesus wants for us, is a life of integrity. It's a lot like that other parable, you know, the one with the boy and the wolf, right? Simple story. Boy goes out, he's supposed to watch the sheep. He gets bored. So what does he do? He cries, wolf, wolf. All of the townspeople come running. They stop their work. They come to help. And the boy's just sitting there laughing. He just wanted to see if he could move them. They all go home. A couple hours later, he's bored again. Wolf, wolf, help. They all come again. Now they're really upset. The boy's just laughing. They all go home. Boy says, all right, I'll be good. I'm going to watch the sheep. Sees an actual wolf, calls out, wolf, wolf. I'm for real this time. Please help, please. I'm in danger. Nobody comes. Now, the way I was told this as a boy is that it's the boy who loses because the boy's eaten or whatever. It's like, you know who actually loses in this story? Everyone. The townspeople lose. The flock loses. The boy loses. Everyone loses when our words and our actions cease to line up in a way that we can be trusted to do what we've said we're going to do. This is the power, I think, of Jesus' little parable. With speaking of things that doesn't line up, this is going to bring me to our dominoes. And for the men in our church today, the dads in our lives, I've got a bunch of these dominoes for you. They're outside. You can grab one if you didn't grab one coming in. And it's not because I'm trying to get a game going. Some of you asked, are we trying to play? And I'm like, no, not today. But because the famous domino effect reminds us of the power of a simple action. Maybe you've been on YouTube and you have seen these incredible displays where they now have 35,000 or so dominoes all set up in these intricate patterns that somebody went one by one by one. And I cannot even imagine the pain of knocking one over, right? And you lose hours of progress. But they do these incredible displays. But the amazing thing that I always love is that every one of these videos, no matter how many dominoes are knocked down in whatever order, in whatever design it happens with all these mechanics, it all starts with the flick of one domino. Notice in Jesus' story, we're not told what type of work is going on in the vineyard. We're not told what each of the sons is doing a year from now. But Jesus says this one simple action seems to chart a trajectory for both of them. And the same can be true in our lives. Our impact, when we choose to stand up and be present, when we choose to stand up and be proximate and faced in the direction that God has for us, to be part of God's design where He has placed us, close enough to our kids, gentlemen, close enough to our families, close enough to the next generation that we can impact them. Not lying down, not doing our own thing, isolated, but close. Our impact can cause a chain reaction, and we can get to be part of something that is more beautiful than we could possibly imagine. But it always starts not with talking about things, but with a simple action. The point of the parable from Jesus, I think, is this. God lovingly invites us to be part of something and to contribute towards it. Notice it's both sons. Notice the invitation is not just for a favorite son and a lesser son. The same words, Jesus said, are spoken, the same invitation to both sons, and the difference is in their response. So the same invitation to be part of Jesus' family and his kingdom and his work, it is offered to all of us, and it is we who decide what we do with it or don't. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, Dawn, in the back, just for sake of time on this Father's Day. Let's go past this next slide, if you will. Yeah, let's get to there. I want to do that one. Yep, let's do that one. Okay. This is going to finally bring us to the scandal of Jesus' own interpretation of his story, which is provided now in verse 31. I direct your attention to the Bibles. Jesus said to them, remember, these are the religious leaders and experts that he's in conversation with. Jesus says, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes, those that the society would have deemed the most sinful people in the lowest rung of society, he tells the religious experts, they are entering the kingdom of heaven ahead of you. For John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin who was a prophet, came to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes did. And even after you saw all of this, saw all of these people entering God's kingdom, you did not repent and believe him. In other words, what Jesus is saying is that those who had said the right things and had the right answers for their whole lives ultimately were not saying yes to the work of the Father that Jesus was inviting them into. Meanwhile, at the same time, the least likely people of all, those who were openly living in sin, the greatest sinners, according to Jesus, were the very first to enter into God's kingdom because they admitted their need and had a change of heart. So to be clear, the New Testament scholar Dr. Craig Keener observes, the point is not that the tax collectors and prostitutes were good, it is that the religious and the political elite were worse in their hypocrisy. It's not that there are some of us who need a challenge from Jesus, it is that all of us need to be challenged by Jesus. To say, where in my life am I refusing God's invitation? And I just want to point this out, the fun fact, the one biographer in the Bible who records this short story from Jesus is a man named Matthew. And I know that Matthew, this story must have meant the world to him because he himself famously had been a tax collector, had been a sinner, surrounded by sinners in his home when one day Jesus showed up and said, Matthew, get up and follow me. So when Matthew heard this story, he self-identified. I was the son who was lying there, blowing off God, saying, no, I'm not going to do this, putting him off. And then I found this invitation from God, and I got up, and now I found my place in this bigger kingdom that he would dedicate his life to. So when he tells this story, he's saying, I was the one who said the wrong thing first, and then God called me to this new thing. And what Matthew does is he becomes part of this long chain of individuals, of rows of people whose lives are impacted by the power of Jesus, who are impacting one another, the ripple effect of which we have not seen the end of and that our world desperately needs. So let's not talk about it, let's be about it. Amen.